GT Countdown.
Here we go!
Top 10 consoles.
The soul of gaming is, without a doubt, the games. But without hardware, games would be ones and zeros floating out in digital space. Endless debates rage on, from aesthetics to pricing and everything in between, like the controllers, the manufacturers, and most assuredly, the games. GT Countdown is here to play the custodian of history and judge the consoles that have made their mark. From humming TVs to aching thumbs, these are the champions.
Number 10. Sega Dreamcast.
Designed as the system to oust the PlayStation and Nintendo 64 from their respective roosts and cut the throats of their heirs, the Sega Dreamcast instead makes the list as the little video game system that almost could. As Sega's final swan song in the hardware business, the Dreamcast sported a number of features that would eventually set the bar for future console releases, like cutting-edge 3D graphics and online gaming. Although only a handful of sports games and Phantasy Star Online supported online play, there were still a number of offline games that kept gamers busy, like the fan favorite Shenmue.
This is cool.
Toss that onto the pile of other classics like Soul Calibur, Sonic Adventure, and Jet Grind Radio, and you begin to see that though its life was short, it left a huge imprint on the industry. The Dreamcast may have been a bad idea in the eyes of consumers, but it was anything but in the hearts of the hardcore.
Number 9. Atari 2600.
Although the pixels may be as big as tumors, and the sounds as blippy as a blip can bleep, there's no denying the 2600. Atari's brightest star, the Pong creators picked up the pace in '77 with the faux wood-paneled Atari VCS, later redubbed to the more Blade Runner-esque 2600. With the ability to switch games via cartridges, the 2600 took off, and with crazy peripherals in tow. Its library and presence swelled, swatting down competitors that offered better graphics and sound. It truly did have games for everyone, even offering a lower echelon for those with adult tastes, as well as standard arcade ports and truly original offerings. Aside from home Pong and Skeet machines, the Atari 2600 established what the console market would eventually become, and unceremoniously destroyed it at the same time with a glut of awful games, which is why this pioneer finds itself at number 9.
Have you played Atari today?
Number 8. Game Boy.
Who would have thought that a portable monochromatic brick would have won the handheld race? The answer lies in part with batteries that lasted well into double-digit hours. The battery lives of the colorful Lynx and Game Gear systems brought on childhood bankruptcies and the ire of mothers. Couple that with the steady miniaturization of Nintendo classics and the brilliant pack-and choice of Tetris, and you have one of the most successful platforms of all time. This old gray mare sold upwards of 70 million units and controlled the portable niche for 9 years, with a little help from Pokemon and the eventual color upgrade. The games were simple, which made them perfect for a mass audience, and even though it seems large by today's standards, it was easily the only pocket-sized system on the market at the time.
Number 7. Nintendo 64.
It may have carried the stigma of being the proverbial kiddie system for some, but there's no denying the star power of the N64. Its use of cartridges limited the amount of memory that its games could utilize in exchange for blazing fast load times and an economic use of resources, making it the perfect party machine for games like GoldenEye, while classics like Super Mario 64 and The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time defined what 3D games would be with bold leaps and bounds in game design. The hardware hosted a bunch of firsts, from the rumble of Star Fox 64 to the analog stick, and for controller ports, the Nintendo 64 firmly established the groundwork for what we'd be playing for years to come. Its software library may be small, but the percentage of AAA games to grace the console is simply second to none.
Number 6.
Genesis does.
Sega Genesis.
You can't do this on Nintendo. Genesis does.
A famous in-your-face slogan boldly proclaimed, "Genesis does what Nintendo don't." The bar was aimed at the original NES, but the Genesis had its advantages over the later Super Nintendo as well. Sonic was faster than Mario. The violent fatalities in Mortal Kombat weren't censored like the SNES version. There was blood in NHL 94, and Sega's Jurassic Park let you play as a vicious man-killing raptor. Sure, the system's audio was a bit primitive, the hardware add-ons like the Sega CD failed miserably, and blast processing was pure marketing hype. But what's that when stacked next to great games, a solid controller, and the debut and subsequent glory days of Sonic?
Number 5. Game Boy Advance.
The handheld dynasty was bequeathed to a worthy offspring. The Game Boy Advance capitalized on the SNES just as the Game Boy had done with the NES, now with thousands of colors and an amazing battery life. Its initial design drew boos from the masses due to its dark screen, but Nintendo was responsive to the complaints and released the elegant SP with a clamshell design and a backlit screen. Then came the tiny durable Micro that can fit in your back pocket. The software lineup for the GBA is absolutely huge and still growing. And for every rehash of a Super Nintendo game, there are new installments of classic franchises like Castlevania to keep tossing wood on the bonfire. How many handhelds can you think of that received a console peripheral to play its games on a big screen? The GBA is still racking up sales almost 6 years after its release, making it one of the most successful platforms of all time.
Number 4. Sony PlayStation 2.
Shouldered with the responsibility of matching the PlayStation's success, the PlayStation 2 met those expectations effortlessly, with an impressive library of games that spanned every genre. No matter what you were into, there was a game on the PlayStation 2 that let you live out your fantasies in the virtual world. The PlayStation 2 also birthed some of the industry's biggest franchises, like Devil May Cry, God of War, and Ratchet & Clank, as well as continuing sagas gamers had grown up with, like Final Fantasy and Metal Gear Solid. Without the PlayStation 2, beating innocent bystanders with baseball bats would still be considered taboo. If you need any further proof of the PlayStation 2's dominance, it's still one of the top-selling consoles almost 7 years after its release. No other platform can stake that claim.
Number 3. Nintendo Entertainment System.
In the 80s, it looked like games had had it. Arcades had retreated into pizza parlors, and the glut of games that had once sustained the 2600 had turned to rot. At this bleak time, a little company from Japan came to power. Nintendo Power. Out went the joystick, and in came the D-pad. High scores gave way to games you could actually complete, and when graphics started smoothly scrolling across the screen, a whole new generation of gamers was born. The NES delivered an 8-bit orgy of software with seemingly countless IP launches that have since become the foundation of the industry. Software integrity was protected by the Nintendo seal of quality, and the Nintendo Entertainment System single-handedly saved the video game industry from the pits of despair.
Number 2. Super Nintendo Entertainment System.
The Super Nintendo eventually won the 16-bit wars, despite being released 2 years after the Sega Genesis. The 8 channels of sampled sounds helped create virtual game operas, like the literal version in Final Fantasy III. Mode 7 fired pseudo-3D games like F-Zero across the starting line, and the system bore new heavy hitters like Mario Kart and Star Fox, while giving us unforgettable RPGs like the fastidious time-traveling Chrono Trigger. The Super Nintendo also grew up classics like Castlevania, Zelda, Metroid, and the mighty mushroom munching machine Mario. And just when people thought the console was toast, Donkey Kong Country came along to make the Genesis blast processing look more like a whimper. If a console's place in history is indeed all about the games, it's hard to deny the Super Nintendo's spot as the second best console of all time.
Number 1. Sony PlayStation.
After a botched deal between Nintendo and Sony to create a disc-based video game system, Sony struck out on its own and created the PlayStation. While it was slow out of the gate, it gradually built steam based upon a shift in focus toward more adult games. The big coup for the PlayStation brand was when Square's Final Fantasy VII jumped ship from the Nintendo 64, only to be followed up by the legendary Metal Gear Solid. This started the snowball tumbling downhill, propelled by exquisite CG streaming off CD-ROMs. The PlayStation is legendary for more than just its games, though. It kick-started mass-market acceptance of the medium, and made playing video games a pop culture phenomenon that is held true to this day. Without the PlayStation, you have to wonder just how big the industry would be today.